Welcome to the Inspire Collective podcast, where our goal is to inspire Christian men and women in the marketplace with all they need to positively influence those around them for God's kingdom. My name is Chris Bowen, and today we're sitting down with Brian Bloye to discuss his experiences in church planting, his advice to those pursuing their calling, and much more. So let's get started. Well, Brian, it is a delight to have you here on the Inspire Collective podcast today, and we're always bringing some great people to our magazine and to our podcast, and we know that today that you're going to give us a wealth of information. There'll be a lot of our viewers today that's going to be really interested in what you have done, and that is, of course, church planting. So we're going to talk a lot about that, but Brian, good to have you on the show today.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Chris. Thanks so much for just inviting me into this conversation. I love talking about church and church planting and all that goes with that.
Awesome. Well, I'm super excited to have you here with the Inspire Collective because I've never met you personally, but I know a lot about you. My youngest son is employed by you there at your amazing church. So really excited to see you, senior pastor of the Westridge Church, and really glad to have you aboard. So a lot of things that we really want to get people to know about you, especially they'll learn a lot more in the magazine that you'll be in with our Inspire magazine. But tell us a little bit, Brian, about yourself and what you did to start church planting. What gave you that unction to just say, hey, I'm going to go open up a church? What did that feel like and how did it happen?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan, right outside Detroit. Grew up there till I was about 15. My dad got saved, came to Christ later in life, and sold our family business, which was we had a bunch of flower shops in the Detroit area. Sold his business, went to Bible college in Texas, and planted a church my senior year of high school in South Florida. And when he did that, I went down there with him, helped him out, and said, I will never do this. I will never, ever plant a church. This is one of the hardest things, you could ever do. And that's before the words church planting were even being used. And so a couple years later, he actually went and started another church in Michigan. I helped him out for a summer. And I went to Liberty University. I was a communications major. God really grabbed hold of my life at the end of my senior year there. And went into ministry. I was a student pastor in New Jersey, and then I spent 6 years in Lynchburg, Virginia, as a student pastor. Got my seminary degree, and right around probably 1995, I was at a Promise Keepers pastors conference in Atlanta with my dad. Chuck Swindoll was speaking. Isaiah chapter 6. Isaiah's calling to ministry. The next thing I know, I'm finding myself face down on the Georgia Dome floor, basically going, God, I don't know why I'm here, but my answer is yes, whatever that looks like. And about 6 months later, God was opening up a door for us to get into church planting. And then he led us to the northwest side of Atlanta, which was not even on my list of, cities to look at. But so my wife and I and our oldest son, Taylor, who at the time was 2, who's now 26, we basically just packed up everything. Everything that we knew, sold, a bunch of stuff, and came here to the northwest side of Atlanta, to Dallas, Georgia, and just started a church from scratch.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So getting ready to celebrate 24 years. And I know maybe a lot of our viewers have maybe never Googled you yet, but I'm sure they will and look up your facilities. And one of the things I do, I have a 5-star series out of 5-star Circle. And my first book was on 5-star quality, beyond 5-star quality. And I must say that walking into your building with your people, with your staff, with the appearance of the building, the sanctuary, everything, it's amazing that you guys really run a 5-star ministry there. After 24 years, the building still looks brand new. The coffee shop is phenomenal. I mean, it's amazing to see what all you guys have done, and now getting ready to celebrate 24 years. That's awesome.
I have a great staff around here.
So you founded the church 24 years ago, and what was some of the obstacles that you had to overcome? Because a lot of people think, well, I'm just going to go out and start a church, and I started one 32 years ago now, retired 5 years, was there 27. So I know there's obstacles, and it's not just, people just waiting to join your church and to throw money at you to build buildings and stuff. So what were some of the obstacles for you?
Well, I mean, obviously, when you start a church with no people, no money, those are two of the obstacles. How do we get people? How do we get money? How do we get people to actually, support this financially? Because it takes money to get churches off the ground. And so we honestly, Chris, I had to get out of my comfort zone. I don't really like asking people for money. And, I remember Pastor Johnny Hunt told me back years ago, if you don't ask people for money, you're going to starve. You and your family are going to starve. So I had to just get out of my comfort zone and go, hey, God's called me to do this, but I've got to become extremely bold in asking people to invest in this and support this. And, I found myself across the table from people going, hey, will you believe in what God's put on our heart? Will you believe in this vision? And not knowing what they were going to say. And the first probably 2 years of planting a church, you are really a lot dependent on other people's investment, people who don't even live around here. So, if you can build a church, fortunately that changes over times. But, and then one of the things I will tell you as an obstacle is church plants seem to attract a lot of different kinds of people. And they certainly attract people who are leaving other churches, sometimes disgruntled. And so when we planted in 97, I remember counting, there were 6 church splits going on in our area at the time. And so when word got around that a new church was coming to this area, and we were very different, like we were the first kind of modern contemporary style church, however you want to call that today, in this whole area. So we had a lot of people coming to check us out. We had a lot of disgruntled people from other churches coming to check us out. I joke and I tell people, the song "The Devil Came Down to Georgia." A lot of people thought that was written about me, moving to Georgia because of, it was just I felt that God wanted us to plant a different kind of church here that really focused on reaching people who were either far from God or people who, didn't know God at all, had never had an experience of meeting him, through salvation. And so we moved to this area. When we moved here, it was the 7th fastest growing county in the country. It was just exploding with growth, young families. But at the same time, this area is the old meets the new. So we were getting a lot of people that were coming disgruntled and really unhealthy from other churches. So that was a huge obstacle for us, is how do we deal with these people who are coming here with an agenda, and, want us to be what they want us to be. And we had a clear vision of what what we knew God wanted us to be. So to be honest with you, I had to really not only asking people for money, but one of the things I had to ask God to do for me at 32 years old was to look people in the eyes who were older than me, more mature than me probably, and to go, this isn't the church for you, and God does have a church for you, but this is probably not it. And I'm telling you, and you were a church planter, there's a lot of really, really tough conversations that go on when people walk in and, they don't like the way you're dressed. They don't like the version of the Bible you're using. They don't like the songs you're singing. And all of a sudden you're getting a lot of really, really mean letters from people, which was some of those first years. And I know this is a crazy story to tell, but I actually had a pastor challenge me to a fist fight.
Wow.
And he did. And I had when we moved here, we had 3 other guys that moved with us and their families. And I apologize for that ding. I don't know how to turn that off, but the guy that challenged me, he was sitting across from me, and we were talking about our churches and how different they were. And he was just getting angry. And all of a sudden he goes, you know what? I think I could take you. And I'm like, what? I thought he was messing with me. Next thing I know, he's going, I think I could take all 3 of you. Let's go outside right now. Wow. I'm like, this guy is legitimately wants to fight me. And it's over our church styles. And so I found out later he had some other issues going on there, which made me feel a little bit better. But so, yeah, I think, I'm not originally from the South. I've lived in different places. So, just getting to know the culture here, I've always somewhat felt a little bit of a fish out of the water being in Dallas, Georgia. So lots of obstacles. I mean, there were so many obstacles to overcome. And, I don't know if you ever really run out of obstacles, to be honest with you, Chris. Certainly the last couple of years have been full of obstacles.
Sure, absolutely. With all the changes and all, I can't even imagine what it's like. It's hard enough to start a church, but then to go through everything that's happened through the pandemic and all has to bring a whole new set of challenges. Sometimes those people that challenge us, though, like you was talking about the pastor that wanted to fight, my next door neighbor pastor that was next to the 7-Eleven that I bought that I started in, just looked at me and said, it's never been anything, never will be anything. And that challenged me. And so we built 7 buildings. The last one was an $8 million structure. And it was simply because of those people that challenged me that said, you can't do it. They gave me more of a desire to say, I'm going to make this thing work. So there you guys have it. Those of you that are viewing today understand that church plant is not all a bed of roses, as you could tell by Pastor Brian, that there's a lot of issues, a lot of things you have to overcome. And so you have to know, and I think that's the key, Brian, is to really know that God has called you to do that. Which brings me to my next question. Becoming the senior pastor, the founding pastor of Westridge, what actually gave you the insight on church planning as you became the senior pastor? First time you came from student pastoring, now you're the senior pastor, not only the senior pastor, but the founding pastor. So what are some things that really gave you the insight of how to successfully plan a church?
Well, I think, there's some common denominators that I think go along with really successful church planners. I think you have to have a true love for people. I think there's, there has to be probably some type of entrepreneurial spirit inside of you that likes to start things from scratch. I think you have to have a lot of faith. And, that's something that I think God has given me just growing up in the house that I did, because, you do go through many, many days where you're like, I'm not sure this is going to make it. And Lord, if it, you just feel like you're stepping out, and that God is the only thing that's underneath your feet. And, and so there are just so many days and that you're like, okay, I'm not even sure how we're going to pay the bills next month. And then God shows up miraculously, and you just keep making decisions knowing that he's going to show up. And, and so it really is a faith journey. And I would say, that you really, I think you have to have a heart for lost people. I really do think that there has to be, some type of evangelistic gifts inside of you. There's a lot of people that start churches today, but there's not a lot of new churches that really reach people either that are really far from God or that are completely lost. I mean, a lot of it's just shuffling sheep around. And so, when we're planting churches, even now, there's certain characteristics in people that we look for. And not to say that we, every church has to look the same. There's certain expressions of churches now where they're meeting in homes or meeting in, in restaurants, and some are, obviously pastoring and starting large churches. But I do think that there are some common denominators, with church planters. And I grew up in a church planter's house, and I am one myself. My father-in-law planted a church. And so, and I'm around them all the time now. So I'm like, I can be in a room with someone for a short amount of time and sitting across the table, and I'm like, okay, I think they could plant a church. There's just something about there is this kind of I don't want to say it's not cavalier, but it's definitely more of this, we're going to go tackle the Wild West. Right. When it comes to church planters, there's something about them. I don't know if it's ADD. I don't know what it is, but there's something about them that is willing to go into, starting something new and trusting God with what's not already there.
Yeah, I love the word that you use. Of course, that's my passion. As you said, the word as you started talking about church planning is the entrepreneurship. In my new book out, The 5-Star Entrepreneur, and that's what the magazine is all about. And when people look at our magazine, we're talking about pastors and people within the church that have businesses and that they are leading the marketplace. And that's what we really think is important. And so many times you see someone that really has a great pulpit presence, but maybe they don't have the business background, or they have the business and they don't have the pulpit presence. Yeah. And that's what's so unique about you, Brian, is you have both. And that's what I think really makes you stand above, is when you find someone with both characteristics. And in my opinion, I feel like that you have to have some kind of entrepreneurial spirit in order to make it go, and to surround yourself, obviously, as you said, with the right people. So, and it's exciting. And I know our viewers are really listening and hearing, because there's a lot of you that are saying, how do I get started? Especially during a time of pandemic. I get tons of calls of people saying, how did you start the church, or where did you start? And today we've got somebody that has done it in such excellence. We're glad to bring them to you, Brian Bloye here, and very excited that he's with the Westridge Church in Dallas, Georgia. So, Brian, can you give us a brief summary? You and your wife wrote a book together called It's Not Personal, Surviving and Thriving on the Journey of Church Planning. So what is that about? Tell us a little bit about your book and what that actually can give our listeners today.
Yeah, so years ago, my wife and I started realizing that we were getting asked a lot of questions about church planting from young church planting couples. And
Hmm.
so many of those had to do with healthiness in ministry, raising kids in ministry. How do you put safeguards around your marriage? How do you put boundaries around your personal time? I mean, there was a series of questions that were just all seemed to be the same. And
Hmm.
so the exponential group actually came to us and said, "Would you guys consider writing a book?" And I'm like, "No, I don't want to do that," because I, if you've written books, Chris, so I mean, it is really a hard thing to do. And they wanted me to write a book with my wife, and I'm sitting here going, "Okay, that's a whole nother level of hard." And not that I mean, I love my wife and I speak together and we do things, but we speak differently, we write differently, and so I'm thinking, how are we going to do that? But really, the book is God just brought it together. We started writing it in 2011. It came out in 2012. Zondervan agreed to publish it, so we had a great publishing company, and it's part of the Exponential series. But it really is just about how do you thrive and not just survive, but how do you thrive in
Mm.
the journey of church planting. And if you actually look at the book, it's kind of a play on words. It's the word "not" is crossed out on the cover, and the reason why we did that was because it does feel very personal. It's
Mm.
like planting a church is like giving birth to something, and it's always God's church. I have to keep reminding myself, "Hey, this is your church, God. It's not my church." Especially when there are problems, God, these are your problems, not my problems. And so, which,
Right.
but at the same time, when people criticize your church or they leave your church or they it's almost like they're criticizing your kids.
Mm.
And I remember that we ran into this guy one time. My wife and I were in Publix, and this guy came up to us and he said, "Hey," and he'd been at Westridge for a long time and we knew his family really well, and he said, "Hey, there's a new church that started in town, and my wife and I feel drawn to go there, and we're leaving." And he said these words, "Hey, it's not personal." And
Mm.
I remember walking away from that conversation going, "It feels very personal." I don't know why, but everything that you just said
Right.
about why you're leaving because he went into why he was leaving and he gave me some reasons, and I thought, I know it's not supposed to feel personal, but it feels really personal right now. And so that's how the book title came about. That poor guy has no idea that we named our book after that conversation. But it church planting and the whole journey that you and your spouse go on when you plant a church is very personal
Yeah.
because you are in it together with your family. Nobody pays a price more than the planter and his wife. And so when you're planting a church, that and with all of that comes all of these stories
Hmm.
that we tell. We tell all of our really good, bad, and ugly about even the pastor wanting to fight me. It's we just thought, you know what, we're just going to lay it all out there, tell all of our war stories, tell
Hmm.
the miraculous stories as well, and then give all this advice that we have in our short time of being in ministry at that time. So really, that's what the book is all about. And people have found it to be really helpful, and we've had a lot of people come up and go, "Hey, you know what? That book is really not even for church planners. It could be for people raising kids or people
Mm.
wanting some marriage advice or people just wanting to know, how do I create margin in my life?" So there's a lot of that in the book.
Wow, what a blessing! Because I don't think our viewers need to hear only the good, because there is the bad and the ugly that go with
Oh
church
yeah,
planting. It's
for
not.
sure.
It's just you wake up one day and God calls you to pastor because He called you to pastor and found a church that it's like, wow, everything is great. There are those obstacles, so I'm really glad that you shared that. Again, his book is. It's not with not crossed out. It's
Right.
personal,
Yep.
surviving and thriving on the journey of church planting. So if you're interested in ever starting a church, I encourage you to get really qualified by reading some great books and some great content. And this book that Brian and his wife has written together is real life. It's things about real struggles, real situations, and as well as the triumphs along the walk as well. So can you tell us a little bit about the engaged churches? So you have something called the engaged churches. What is the objective of this? And for the viewers, maybe they've never heard of engaged churches, what exactly is that?
Well, we realized we got into planting other churches pretty early in the process of, shortly after we started Westridge, we recognized that this was not going to be just one church. God wanted us to plant a lot of churches, and not just, here in the United States, but all over North America and all over the world. And as we got into that, one of the things that we recognized was that there was a lot of church planters out there that just didn't feel connected to either a denomination or a network. And even a lot of, planters who were planting through denominations, they just did not feel that there was a lot of care out there for them. And so there's just a lot of lone rangers out there who are struggling. And so somewhere we started a network in 2010 called Launch. And it really was to come up with some systems that we ended up giving over to the North American Mission Board. And out of that, we recognized, I think there's probably 180 something churches out there that we've had a hand in starting, not whether it was directly out of Westridge or we helped them get started somehow that we were connected to. And I had a friend just say, hey, why don't you wrap your arms around all of these churches and just kind of create a family, because they need a place to belong. And so I have a guy on our staff who's full-time with us named Kevin Dunlap. That's his full-time job is just, really loving on our church planters and their spouses, providing care for them, providing some resources and tools. And so right now there's over 360 churches that are connected to us. And we have a lot of tools for spouses. We have a couple marriage retreats that we put together every year. We have actually a big conference that we host at Westridge every December. We actually had Sam Chan come and speak. I think it was 3 years ago in December. He came and spoke. And so every year that continues to grow, and we keep running into these planters and their wives out there that are going, hey, can we be part of engaged churches? And so what we're doing now, Chris, is we're actually creating opportunities for churches to plant churches together through engaged churches. And so we're partnering with the Send Network through the North American Mission Board, through the New Thing Network up in Chicago with Exponential, and working with them to not only provide care and support for church planting couples, but also how do we now plant churches together? And one of the things I think that God has put on my heart, my wife's heart, Amy, is just the longevity and the healthiness of church planting couples. And right now we've just felt in the season of life that we're in, that God is wanting us to invest in a lot of younger church planting couples and just helping them to thrive in the journey and to just come along and provide as much encouragement and equipping and support as we can. So that's really what Engaged Churches is all about right now.
Wow, that's dynamic. I wish I would have heard of that 32 years ago, because when I started, it was just we were independent and I never had that connection. And so it sounds like yours is a much healthier. And so for those of you that are listening to the podcast now, really listen to what Brian is saying. He's very successful in church planting now, helped nearly 180 churches do this. And so really the connection and the being able to connect to something that's done it, somebody who understands, I think that's important and vital. I really believe, Brian, that my church could have done even greater things, even though we were known as what they call mega ministries. I think they could have got so much bigger had I had those kind of connections and understood that. So for those of you listening, just hear the advice and the things. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Find people that have done it and just really embrace the ideas. And that's why Brian is here with us today on the Inspire Collective, to encourage those of you that are out there listening and hearing and saying, I wish I could start a church. I feel like a calling, but I don't know where to start. Find a network. Find something like he is sharing with you. You don't have to be alone. So I know that you also have some things going on, and tell the listeners a little bit about the Engage Burkina. It's serving Burkina Faso, Africa. Where can people get connected with this, and what is it that you guys are actually doing in Africa?
Yeah, so I'll just give you just a brief background on what happened. 2006, I was sitting in Willow Creek Church for the Global Leadership Summit, and Bono, the lead singer of U2, was being interviewed, and he was just really talking about what was going on in Africa at the time. And at the time there were so many Africans that were dying of AIDS. And he also brought up the issue of waterborne illnesses and malaria. And, I knew some things that were going on in Africa, but I didn't really know to what extent how bad things were. And I just sat there, honestly, Chris. I was so convicted. My elders were with me at the time, and we walked out onto the lawn outside the church where we were. And I just said, I feel like God wants us to do something. And I had no connection to a country in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And through just a series of really miraculous connections, we found this country, Burkina Faso, which is up in Northwest Africa, which most people have never heard of. And when I started researching it and really digging into it, I found out it was the third poorest country in the world. It's landlocked. It doesn't have a whole lot of natural resources, so it's not connected to the ocean. Education wise, it's one of the lowest as far as people having literacy problems and this and that. And so I sent a team over there. When I tell people the story, it's kind of like I tell them it's like Moses sending the 12 spies into Israel, into the promised land. I sent a team of 5 or 6 guys over, and I said, I want you to go over there and find out what the needs are. Mm-hmm. And they came back, and we laid out a strategy of 5 different things that we felt like God was wanting us to connect with. And wow. Some of it was education. Some of it was water, wells. Obviously, another one was church planting. We got connected to Compassion International over there. So we created a partnership where we've been building compassion sites. But we just decided we're going to invest our church, our lives into this country, and we're going to stay here for the rest of our lives. And we just kind of set up shop, and we created a nonprofit. We put a team on the ground eventually over there. And so over the past, since 2009, we've had a chance to now build over 700 wells. Wow. 700 hand dug wells, and then another 300 drilled wells. And we've had a chance to plant, I think right now it's over 120 churches there. We've built 3 compassion sites, a high school. We've built a vocational school, and we've been working on an elementary school, and we've been working with actually through the Christian Missionary Alliance over there. Mm-hmm. And so I've had several meetings with government officials over there, just trying to figure out how can we continue to come alongside of the Burkina Bay people. We decided that we were going to invest in one people group and just see what we could do to change their lives. So again, through water, education, through food and those things, and also just through sharing the gospel with them. So we took this group called the Pugali people, and we have had a chance over the last, since 2009, 2010, to see over 6,000 of those people come to faith in Christ. And now they are going into another people group called the Ja, and now discipling them and leading them to Christ. So it's really been amazing to watch something happen. I tell people that it is the closest thing I've ever been part of to the book of Acts, to not only watch God truly change people's lives, but we've seen true healings, like real miracles take place that can only be explained, through the intervention of God being involved, directly in those moments. And so, we started a nonprofit so that other churches and other people could get involved. Actually, the University of Notre Dame started investing thousands of dollars into our well digging projects because they were studying the impact of clean water on people who before didn't have it. And so they've been over there with their teams doing research, but have been investing in what we're doing along with just other churches and denominations. And so it's been an amazing thing, honestly, Chris. I think when I look back on my life, I will look back and I'll go, that's one of the most fulfilling, hopefully fruitful things that I did with my life, through my ministry years.
Yeah. And paying it forward. And Brian, every chance I get, I drop in on you guys. I absolutely love what's happening there at Westridge. If you guys just stumbled upon us here at the Inspire Collective magazine and podcast, we're sitting down talking with Brian Bloye, the senior pastor of the Westridge Church in Dallas, Georgia. And he's a church planter of 24 years and a successful one at that. So amazing, Brian, to hear about what all is happening there in Africa. The last 2 times I visited your church, the first time I visited, I walked away in tears. You guys had given a car away to a young man that was working at Chick-fil-A. And I left so full. I mean, I really did. I just left so full of saying, this is what ministry is about. And then I was off the road and stumbled back in there again. And the next time you had redid a house for somebody and totally renovated to a young lady that just lost her husband. And so there's so much about giving now. You guys are such a giving people and a giving church. And I think that you guys are a prime example of what it means to really plant a church and to be able to reach out, because you don't just keep what you have there. You're sharing it not only in your community, but around the world. So for those of you who are listening to the podcast today, do it right, do it big, and make sure that you realize that when God's in it, that he will provide and make provision. And that's what we're hearing today from our guest, Brian Bloye, again, pastor of the Westridge Church in Dallas, Georgia. So I know that you've inspired a lot of people today, and especially me. I'm always inspired by my guests. I come in to ask questions and I always leave full because I think that there's so much about connecting to find people that we have here at the Inspire magazine and the Inspire podcast. Where can people get a hold of you, connect with you, find out about the things you're doing in Africa, the things you're doing locally there in Dallas, and even your ministry there in Dallas? How would people get in touch?
Yeah, I mean, they can connect with us through our website at westridge.com. They can go to, with Engage Burkina, they can go to engageburkina.org. And then also, if there are pastors out there who are listening who are just like, you know what, I would just love for my wife and I to get connected to, a network that is focused on really focusing on our personal health, helping us to raise children that survive ministry, and maybe even interested in planting some other churches. You can connect with us, just call the church and we'll get you connected through it with Kevin Dunlap with Engaged Churches. I will tell you this, Chris. We don't give away cars every Sunday, so you picked some great Sundays.
I picked two amazing Sundays.
Oh my gosh, yeah, you picked two great Sundays to come to. But yeah, I mean, you can call the church, and we would love to help anybody we can to get connected to either what we're doing or help get them connected to something else that would further their ministry experience. One thing I would say to anybody that wants to plant a church, I would say, make sure that you go through a really good assessment, that you and your spouse, your wife, I know that you go through an assessment to where you can really spend some time with people who care about you and love you and want to see just nothing but the best for you, who can assess your calling and really assess your ministry gifts and can kind of walk through those early days with you. And you mentioned this earlier, Chris, my early days of ministry were really lonely, even though I was connected to a denomination. Right. I was just kind of like, I just kind of felt like I was kicked out there to go on my own. And so there are so many great networks out there, not just ours, that are doing so much better work with coming along church planters and assessing them, training them, coaching them, but also putting their arms around them and loving them. And you mentioned this earlier, and I just want to emphasize, don't try to do this by yourself, because you just don't need to. First of all, there's so many great resources and tools out there. And it's just hard. I mean, it's a hard calling, but it's so fruitful and so rewarding. And you and I both, if we stayed on here for another couple hours, we could just tell amazing stories of what God has done through church planting in the last, just in our own experiences. But I was meeting with our church planter interns today. We have 2 of them right now. And I said, listen, if you don't take the hard steps of faith, then you don't have the great stories to tell. God writes these amazing stories when we take steps in faith. And I know there's probably a lot of people listening right now who are maybe, asking the question, does God want me to start a church? Do I move into this? And I would say, if there's anything else you can do, then do that, but if you can't get this out of your mind and you can't get a place out of your mind, and man, just take a step of faith. But, I always tell people, don't run towards something. Don't run away from something. Some of the hardest stories of church planting I've ever heard have been people who are starting something that they don't, because they're trying to run away from something else, or, they're starting a church going, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that. Start a church and go, no, God's given me a new vision, a fresh vision. It's for this area. And I'm starting it because God's put something dynamic in my heart that I just can't wait to express and share with other people.
Wow, that's exciting, Brian. I have been. We've the Inspire podcast is only since April, and of course, we're getting ready to publish our next magazine now, and all that's getting ready to go to print. And I can tell you, out of the 40, I keep saying to my staff, this is not going to get any better. It just can't get any better. But today, I think we got better, and this is amazing. It's great information. I think it's where people really, really live, and I think there's a lot of viewers today that are listening and just saying, okay, so I think I'm getting the understanding. And maybe some that's saying this just isn't for me, and that's okay too. Like you said, if you can do something else, maybe that's the best thing. But I know that when it's inside of you, that you can't eat, sleep, nothing until you fulfill the dream that God has placed inside of you. So as we wrap up today, can you tell us any closing thoughts, maybe engagements or advice that you could give the Inspire Collective listeners today? Or maybe you want to just drop in to your church and see what's happening there. Anything that you can tell them to just encourage them today as we go?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just excited about what God's doing right now in our world. I know that this is a tough time for a lot of people. I actually, right before we got on the phone to here today, Chris, I lost a good church planning friend. Started his church a couple years after ours, and we helped him, and he just died of COVID this morning. So there's a lot of people going through really, really tough times. But I also believe that God is doing some really good things right now. And I was reading a quote this morning from William Carey where it says, expect great things from God and attempt great things from God. And I think right now, this is a season where God's people really have a chance to shine. Mm-hmm. And because we know, that nothing happens that doesn't go through his fingertips. So everything that's going on around us, whether it's all of the political tension or social tension or the pandemic stuff that's happening, that we just need to know, that God is in the midst of all of it, and he is working all of this out for good. And I really do believe that there are some great opportunities in front of us right now. The church has been set up to be able to answer the questions that society is asking right now, and to be a place of healing for people, a place of growth and learning where families can truly thrive. And we're one of the things that we're seeing, and I've been hearing this from a lot of other pastor friends, is there are so many people who are being drawn to church right now who were never in church before, because they're going there. There's got to be more to this life than what's happening. And so I'm inspired. I'm encouraged by that. But I would say to those listeners, and I know we've been talking a lot about church planning. One of the things that God has inspired my wife and I to do right now, and is just to be more devoted to prayer than ever before. And my wife and I have been prayer walking around the church every morning. And we're seeing God answer prayers in our own personal lives in greater ways than I can remember. I feel almost like this is early church planning days where I'm watching God just do incredible, miraculous things. So, I would say, just to encourage the listeners, especially for this podcast, and especially if you're looking at maybe one day start, planning a church, all of that in my own personal journey was birthed out of my prayer time with God, on my face before the Lord in that Georgia Dome floor, as I mentioned earlier. But what we're seeing God do right now in the lives of the people in our church, and in the lives of even my own kids, seems to be coming out of our prayer life. And I just want to encourage the listeners to hear today, just to know this, that God, even though it looks like a lot of crazy stuff's going on around us, God is still in control. He is sovereign. Right. And I really believe that he is positioned the church right now to do its very best work. And I want to encourage your listeners to dig in and lean into the Lord and just really seek him like never before through your prayer life. What a gift that God's given us. Right. And that God wants to do things. He wants to answer some prayers. He's just wanting us to be connected closely to him. And that's how he accomplishes things. So lean in.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Brian, for being a part of the Inspire Collective podcast today. And again, viewers, we've been listening to Brian Bloye, the senior pastor and founder of the Westridge Church in Dallas, Georgia. Also the author of It's Not Personal, and he changed that to It's Personal, Surviving and Thriving on a Journey of Church Planning. So we appreciate you taking your time out of your busy schedule today, Brian, to be with us and to share with our audience. So thank you so much. And I pray that you have many, many great blessings coming ahead of you. God bless, and thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much, Chris. I've loved the conversation.
We hope this conversation with Brian Bloye has left you feeling both motivated and inspired. For more content, you can sign up for the Inspire Collective magazine and get your first year subscription absolutely free. For more on this offer, visit us at inspirecollective.com. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next week for more of the Inspire Collective podcast.